minor panic has broken out among the chattering class after a few conservative commentators demonstrated an interest in interrogating the civil rights revolution and its accompanying legal framework. Publications, both liberal and conservative, have expressed grave concern that anyone might question the necessity of an oppressive bureaucracy that has spent trillions of dollars and wielded unprecedented state power in an effort to detect the slightest amount of wrongthink in the public and private sector. While the ideological core of wokeness may have involved a heavy dose of cultural Marxism, the juridical and moral vehicle used to advance this ideology was clearly civil rights law. The fear of being called mean names has driven conservatives away from many critical battles, but if the right can't face the fact that civil rights law has played a central role in the destruction of their nation, then there's simply no future for the movement. In Christopher Caldwell's essential book, The Age of Entitlement, he lays out the process by which civil rights law supplanted the American Constitution. According to Caldwell, the Civil Rights Act was adopted in good faith by a then overwhelmingly white American population as a temporary emergency measure designed to solve the problem of discrimination. Politicians sold the bill as a way to end the ugly practice of segregation that lingered in the South and put the black population on equal legal footing. Most of the legislation's supporters couldn't imagine a scenario where the Civil Rights Act would apply to their neighborhood or impact their children. Voters were in for an ugly surprise when just a few years later the federal government implemented forced busing and racial quotas across the nation. The unprecedented authority granted by the Civil Rights Act was used to create a vast enforcement bureaucracy with the power to govern every organization in the country. Government offices, corporations, and private institutions were required to keep meticulous records detailing the racial characteristics of those they employed or served. Companies instituted racial preferences and warped their hiring policies around the goal of avoiding lawsuits based on their lack of diversity, which gave birth to the all-powerful human resource departments that terrorize conservatives today. Basic instruments of employment screening like aptitude tests were banned due to their disparate impact on minorities that routinely scored lower despite there being no evidence of intentional discrimination. This is one of the primary reasons why ultra-progressive universities became the dominant form of legal credentialization for employers. Civil rights law destroyed or curtailed several core constitutional rights, including freedom of association, property rights, and freedom of speech, while circumventing the amendment process. A web of executive orders, judicial decisions, and litigation replaced the legislative process and became the standard by which every organization defined its own policies. The Civil Rights Act played a critical role in the development of the administrative state, where experts implement their plans for social engineering through the dictates of unaccountable federal agencies. In an era of democratic gridlock, civil rights law became the permanent state of exception through which government could shape society without regard for the previous boundaries drawn around its power by the Constitution. The cause of civil rights was holy, and anyone who questioned the method of its implementation could simply be labeled racist. Activists of every stripe recognized the power of this new political weapon and adjusted their strategy accordingly. If you wanted to avoid the difficult and messy task of convincing the voting public and passing legislation, you could instead gain access to the new and more powerful Constitution by turning your issue into a civil rights issue. Immigration, feminism, gay marriage, and trans inclusion made amazing strides by appealing more often to the architecture of civil rights law than to the will of the voter. When the question was put to residents of ultra-liberal California in 2008, they supported Proposition 8 and its restriction on same-sex marriages. Activists responded by bypassing the democratic process and assuring that the Supreme Court could enact their will via the Civil Rights Constitution. Despite the obvious fact that civil rights law has destroyed the American Constitution, many conservatives feel compelled to defend it as if it's a sacred institution, which would be laughable if it wasn't so tragic. Like every cancerous growth of government power, the Civil Rights Act was sold to the public as a temporary measure, but Republicans treat this as the one government bureaucracy that can just never be questioned. Many conservative leaders pretend that if the Civil Rights Act was removed tomorrow, Jim Crow laws targeting blacks would suddenly sweep the nation. This is the same logic that Joe, they're gonna put y'all back in chains, Biden uses when he's race baiting. It reveals that Republican leaders believe the exact same thing about their base that Democrats do. Conservatives are all secret racists, and without a giant web of government monitoring their every interaction, they would revert back to their natural state. The sad truth is that institutional racism does exist under the Civil Rights Act. Corporations hold mandatory training on how to be less white. Organizations offer scholarships, internships, home loans, and small business assistance, which are all marked "whites need not apply." And these institutions proudly proclaim their bigoted initiatives as part of a commitment to diversity. This discrimination has existed comfortably under civil rights law, as did affirmative action until just a few months ago. While change is hopefully coming after the Supreme Court's ruling on Harvard admission standards, racial hiring quotas and institutional bias continue. We can debate the particulars about the intellectual origins of wokeness, but what's beyond debate is that civil rights law created the second constitution that allowed this progressive crusade to rapidly conquer our entire country. The Civil Rights Act was a temporary fix for a temporary problem, but it's grown and mutated to the point where it dominates every institution. Civil rights law has created a second and illegitimate constitution through which the left rules the United States, and it needs to go. Thanks for watching, guys. If you enjoyed this video, go ahead and click like, and if you haven't subscribed yet, now is a great time to do so. If you'd like to get these broadcasts as podcasts, make sure that you go ahead and subscribe to the Auron MacIntyre Show on your favorite podcast platform. And when you do, make sure to leave a rating or review. That really helps with the algorithm magic. If you'd like to follow me on Twitter or Gab or Substack, if you'd like to watch these videos on Rumble or Odyssey, the links to all of that stuff are down below in the description. And of course, you can read all of my columns and watch all of my shows over at The Blaze. Thanks for watching, guys, and as always, I'll talk to you next time.